All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really heavy but absolutely fascinating topic, the deep psychological roots of how childhood trauma shapes who we become as adults. We're looking specifically at Jeremy Smith's short anthology, Red Light, Green Light, Yellow Light. It is just this gripping, heartbreaking look at how our past doesn't just, fade away. It actively writes the script of our present lives.
We kick things off with this quote: "How the fuck did I become so awkward?" We're dropped immediately into the present day with our main guy, Lance. And man, his internal monologue is just harsh. He gets this really genuine compliment from a supportive friend, Kelly, about his writing, and he literally cannot accept it. Instead, he feels totally fake, rehearsed. He actually labels himself a dumbass the second he walks away from her. He's so deeply uncomfortable in his own skin that making a basic human connection feels impossible. But why?
To figure that out, we have to follow this really unique timeline the author sets up. It goes from point 1, present day in the prologue, to point 2, childhood in chapter 1. Point 3 is back to the present day in chapter 2. Then point 4 hits adolescence in chapter 3. And finally, point 5 brings us back to the present day in chapter 4. It's like a pendulum, constantly swinging back and forth between the crushing awkwardness of his adult life and the severe abuse of his past.
So, looking at the present struggle, a writer blocked by his own mind, what we see is adult Lance dealing with incredibly high, basically impenetrable walls. He just assumes his friend Kelly is lying to him when she compliments him. He desperately wants to write authentic dialogue, but feels completely incapable of having a genuine interaction in real life.
Which pulls us into echoes of childhood trauma, the roots of the awkwardness. We are abruptly yanked out of Lance's quiet, isolated adult world right into the loud, terrifying reality of his childhood, specifically the exact moment his enraged grandmother kicks in his bedroom door.
And this brings up the concept of hypervigilance, which is a state of increased alertness and sensitivity to hidden dangers, frequently developed as a trauma response to an unpredictable, abusive environment. Smith brilliantly illustrates this. Young Lance has his room meticulously organized, but not because he's a neat kid. It's pure survival. He's trained himself to find absolutely anything and move completely in the dark without making a single sound. He literally times his movements to the noise of his grandfather's old Western reruns on the TV, just so his grandmother won't hear him. It is a heartbreaking reality that kids in these environments actually rewire their brains to detect specific footsteps just to stay safe.
Think about how Smith maps this red light, green light, yellow light motif directly onto Lance's nervous system. The red light represents stopping, freezing in fear, submission, triggered by a decorative traffic light on his wall and the abuse itself. The green light, that's flying, escaping, freedom, triggered by the wind in his dreams and his need for avoidance. And the yellow light represents this awful nausea, anxiety, and anticipation of attack, completely tied to the lava lamp on his nightstand. Everyday objects in his room are literally turned into anchors of panic.
Moving into escapism and survival, flying away from the monsters. To survive these absolutely brutal mornings where his brother gets cold water thrown on him and his grandmother screams that they ruined their lives, Lance just tested dissociate to get through it.
His coping mechanisms are all about erasing himself, hyper-organization to eliminate noise, listening to Metallica at a near-silent volume, so quiet it just sounds like faint beeps in his headphones, dissociating into dreams of flying away from the monsters, and masking his trauma with this robotic, silent compliance. He's just hollowing himself out completely just to survive the day.
Then we bounce back to returning to the present, the most social, lonely person. Escaping his apartment to get away from the nausea brought on by that yellow lava lamp, Lance steps outside into a gorgeous day, only to realize that despite being surrounded by all these friendly neighbors, he feels utterly insincere and completely, totally isolated.
Which leads right into social scars and rejection, the compounding of trauma. We plunge back to his adolescence in Chapter 3 to see exactly why that isolation is so deep-seated. Right at the moment, Lance actually tries to break his silence and ask out a library aide named Clara.
Comparing the voices of rejection here is just devastating. On side A, you have his grandmother screaming, "This is why you'll never amount to anything. You're worthless." And on side B, Clara casually says, "Oh God, no, you're retarded." This juxtaposition is brutal. It shows exactly how the verbal violence from his grandmother primed him to instantly internalize Clara's casual cruelty. His trauma compounds. Every single social interaction turns into a minefield where he just expects to be destroyed.
And that brings us to the final breakdown, when the past engulfs the present. Adult Lance is sitting there, trying to study an author discussing antagonist backstories, but his own internal monsters, his unhealed childhood wounds, start waking up and dragging him under.
Red light. As the panic attack really sets in, the words on his page actually begin to strobe and flash in his mind. The red light is back, and it represents this complete and utter loss of control. The trauma response just totally overrides his rational adult brain.
Green light. He tries so desperately to command the beast to stay down, to just escape it. But, punctuation is not a sword, and inflection isn't a bullet. His attempts to write his way out are no match for the deep-rooted trauma that is now completely engulfing his work.
Yellow light. The story leaves us right here, in this quiet, dissociative state. The flashing lights act as a final, inescapable cage built entirely by his past. He's trapped in that nauseating yellow glow of childhood terror, totally paralyzed. So I want to leave you with this question to really chew on. How do the unhealed monsters of our childhood write the dialogue of our adult lives? Jeremy Smith's Anthology really forces us to look in the mirror and ask, until we address the flashing lights of our own trauma, are we actually the authors of our own stories? Or are we just destined to be victims of our past antagonists? It's a heavy thought, but absolutely crucial for understanding how our past shapes us. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I hope it gave you some powerful things to reflect on.